Now, Ukraine's chief peace negotiator will meet the US envoy Steve Witkoff in Geneva on Thursday. It comes ahead of new three-way talks with Russia expected in early March. The meetings are the latest round of negotiations that so far have failed to make any meaningful progress on ending the Kremlin's four-year invasion of Ukraine. Well, I want to spend the next few minutes talking to Viktoria Honcharuk. She is a Ukrainian who left behind her dream job on Wall Street as an investment analyst at Morgan Stanley to become a combat medic on the front lines of the conflict in 2022. And Viktoria is here in the studio with me. Welcome here to the programme. So pick up the story, because that was an incredible decision you made to leave Manhattan and go back home. Talk me through what went through your mind.
Well, from a very young age, I had a dream of traveling the world. I'm from a small town in Ukraine, so never got to travel a lot when I was younger. I wanted to travel the world, make a good career and a name for me and my family. So that led me to get scholarship first in high school in the US and then in university in the US. And I got a degree in computer science and went into finance after my university. Had probably was in the right track to have that good life and a really promising career. But when Russia attacked my country, I couldn't stand behind. And as somebody who believes in freedom, as somebody who lives in freedom of my family, and somebody who wanted to stand up for my values, the decision was very easy, actually, to go back.
And your sister joined up at the same time. We were seeing pictures there of you in Manhattan. How quick was it before you actually ended up on the front lines? How quick was that transition?
It was pretty quick. I had a week and a little bit of training before I had to go to the front line.
Only a week.
Yes, and I was afraid of blood and needles. I was, not a soldier for sure, not a warrior that you would picture when you talk about the war. But I had willingness to help my country, and I had willingness to fight for my values, and that was enough to learn very, very quickly.
And you ended up pretty quickly on some of the most intensive fighting front lines, didn't you? Bakhmut, Avdiivka. Just describe for me what that was like, because it must have been horrific day by day.
It was, I'm not going to lie. I did have an easy entry, I would say, because first couple of weeks we don't have that many injured, and I had somebody look after me, somebody who had more experience, I could learn from them. But then when we moved to Avdiivka direction, that was pretty difficult. And then I've seen some very horrific stuff with our wounded and fallen soldiers. But
give me an idea of just the amount of people you were having to deal with every day at that stage.
It really depends day to day, but sometimes we've had as many as 100 wounded per week that we had to evacuate.
I mean, the human cost of this war, you don't need me to tell you, it has been absolutely horrific. In terms of the group, the friends, the people that you joined with, how many have been killed?
That's a tough question. Many. That's definitely the way to put it. Me and my sister had a friend group, essentially, that she served with and I was very close with. And throughout the years, most of them were killed by Russia. And just yesterday, the premiere of a documentary that we just spoke about, they showed some of the faces and the pictures of the fallen friends of ours.
That is very, very tough. So amongst your group, so many have been lost already. You gave an interview a few days ago and I was reading it, and you described how the war has changed. And we've known that in terms of the use of drones on the battlefield. We've seen that over the last year and more. But for a medic, how has the use of drones changed what you were doing on the front lines?
Drastically. By nature doctrine, just in general, military doctrine, you have the golden hour when you evacuate a soldier from when it's been wounded to when it is at a stabilization point. And so me as a medic, I was evacuating, doing case evacuation, med evacuation from positions to stabilization point. In the beginning of the war, without drones, we were able to do it pretty easily. Just jump in an armored vehicle or non-armored vehicle, going into positions and picking people up. But with time, with introduction of drones, mass usage of drones, we had to go far and far behind. And if we were standing less than a kilometer away before, we're standing 10 to 15 kilometers back now. And it can only go when we have all clear from our commanders on fiber optic drones.
I know I'm asking you some tough emotional questions, but you said in that Times interview that because of the change and because you couldn't get to where those people had been injured, there are times when you actually hear them on the radio and there's nothing you can do for them. Absolutely.
That is the worst thing ever, when you hear the radio chatting and you know the person is injured in a really bad state, but you cannot do anything. You know, Ukraine has been adapting really, I think, well to its conditions because introduction of unmanned ground systems, for example, or UGVs, essentially robots, have helped with evacuation a lot. Obviously, we're going to do it all the time, but for example, in a brigade that I work with, most of the evacuations are done now by UGVs for the first few kilometers before we can pick them up.
So robots, that's not something that actually people have heard much about, certainly here in the UK. So that's increasingly been used on the ground, on the front lines, to try to retrieve people who've been injured, as opposed to you as medics actually having to go there.
To give you a picture, before to evacuate somebody, you'd first have to drag them to a certain location from where we can pick them up, and that involved 2 or 3 men having to drag that wounded person, usually result in additional injuries because, you know, Russians are seeing the evacuation process and trying to hit those. Same for logistical operations, just to bring some supplies to positions. Usually people had to walk and do it, and unmanned ground vehicles have replaced lots of that. So we have less injuries even because we have less exposure of infantry on positions.
I mentioned before we came to you that another round of negotiations are going to happen tomorrow, Steve Witkoff being there. Steve Witkoff said over the weekend in one interview, he described the war as, quote, a silly war. When you hear the US peace negotiator describe your 4 years of war as a silly war, just describe what you feel when you hear that.
I don't think it's a silly war, obviously. It is, well, I think it's silly that it started, but we didn't start it, right? It's not definitely silly on our side because we are fighting for our freedom, but also fighting for the rest of Europe. And just to be here today, I think a lot of that is because of the men and women in Ukraine who 4 years ago decided to not surrender. And so I don't think it's silly. It's the war for freedom.
But disrespectful.
But it's silly for Russia to keep doing this, let's be honest.
Before I ask you a final question, I just want to actually put on to the screen some of the pictures from the last 4 years, that some of which people will remember, that in the opening days and weeks, that column of Russian tanks that was supposed to roll into Kyiv so quickly. So those pictures are playing. Let me ask you, if you had a message to European leaders, let's leave the Americans to the side for a second, what would your message be?
I don't think Europe is ready to fight a war if there to be a bigger war, but we also know that Russia is not going to stop in Ukraine if we were to fail. So my biggest message is you need to let Ukraine teach you. Let Ukrainian soldiers and veterans teach you the modern doctrine. We've seen a wonderful article in Wall Street Journal just the other week about Ukrainians doing wargaming with NATO countries, and Ukrainian tank operators, I think it was, destroying 2-3 battalions of NATO countries. I think that speaks a lot for what Ukraine needs to be doing, and Ukraine needs to be teaching our allies. We're interested in Europe being strong. We want Europe to be strong because we are all on one side.
Final quick question about you. You're here in London. You were here for that documentary premiere yesterday. Are you planning to go back, to return to the work that we've been talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. A couple of days.
Couple of days. Viktoria, we have to leave it there, but it's been fascinating talking to you, and thank you so much for coming in to talk to the BBC today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.